Okay, before I jump out of this, I just wanted to show you other things to be thinking about in all of this. So if I zoom in on this and we actually take a look at the mask on my adjustment layer, so on the curve that's actually pulling that out. Again, if you hold down your Option key and click on the mask, you can sort of see areas, I can spot areas where I've actually missed that I should probably consider filling these areas in. So even though I'm not seeing it in the curve right here, I might consider actually adding that part. So again, I can still go to my brush and I can do this blind. That part doesn't really matter. I'm still got my really low flow brush, and I can actually start to crank this in, except it doesn't seem to be wanting to do that. Yep, there we go. I can do that sort of thing in here and sort of down here. I can do those sorts of things. But then you get into issues like this, that it's sort of like it's really hard to paint these areas in here. Do not ever forget this. People seem to forget this all the time, that all of your filters run on your layer masks as well. So I'm simply at this stage of the game, I feel like it's a little blotchy and splotchy in there. I'm using a brush that's completely soft, but there's nothing to stop me from coming in. Again, I've got my layer mask selected, from simply coming in and running the Gaussian blur on the layer mask. And you can smack these things pretty hard. So I can actually pop this up. I can get to this stage of the game and say okay to that and see if that actually helped me out. Again, I would probably be watching that while that whole thing was going down. So I'll go back in one step before and then come back to this one. And it's a little smoother transition in there. It's not quite so jumpy around. So at any rate, don't forget those parts. You also have a blur tool that exists over here. So again, it's this thing that looks like an eyedrop. You've also got a sharpening tool that exists over here as well. So don't forget that your tools work on layer masks. In addition, it's not just for pixel content. At any rate though, I'm going to throw this away and I'm going to show you what I think is a much better way of actually doing this part. And the reason I think this is a better way of doing it is that it actually targets the color of this, and that for me is the important part. We're going to start it out the same way we did before, because we do need to find what we consider to be, again, I'm still nervous about picking a point that is one of the areas that is not as sunburnt as I'm trying to correct. So I'm going to do the very same thing again. I'm going to start out the exact same way. Command-J simply to duplicate this to another layer. To make a copy of that layer. I am going to blur it again so that I get rid of any of that chance of hitting something that's really blotchy. So again, I'm going to do a Gaussian blur. I'm not going to do a 24. I'm going to do more like a 3 or a 4. So yeah, like I've got a 3.7. Anyway, it'll be more than good enough. So this area that it's still got that my color sampler point on it is actually a good area for me. However, I'm not going to use these color numbers anymore. I'm actually going to do this one more by eye. So I need to do this using a hue saturation adjustment layer. And so that's what I'm going to add on top of this. So come down to your layers palette, click on, we're going to add a hue adjustment layer, a hue saturation layer on top of this. But the thing about your hue saturation layer that you'll see right now is that if you've never gone deep into this dialog box, what you've actually got by default at the very top is you've got a master drop-down menu. If you click on that master, you'll see that you've got master is actually would be saying you're going to affect all of these colors. So if you leave it on master, it will change the saturation, the hue, or the lightness of everything in your image. We want to be much more targeted about this. So you could come down and you could pick reds, although my serious suspicion is that the area that is sunburned here is not red, it's actually magenta. You don't really know. So I'm going to actually use the targeting adjustment tool to actually pick it. But I want to talk about what all these sliders are first so that we know how to control and use those guys as well. The first slider at the very top is simply a hue shift, and it does, again, you can crank it in one direction or another. It shifts everything. Anything that's actually got a hue to it, it will actually shift. Now, the reason that it's not changing the bra at all is because the bra has, or the swimsuit top, whatever that is, it doesn't have any color in it. It has no hue in it, it's black. So none of that's actually going to change. Saturation, again, it's a purity slider. It's actually making things more saturated, greater purity. That's why it gets more extreme. The other direction, if we go all the way down to the bottom, and all the way to the left-hand side, it removes all the saturation, leaving us a black and white image. I'm going to go back and zero this out again. And then lightness, again, is actually, if one extreme, it's going to take it to white. The other extreme takes it to black. So it's just pushing it either towards the white end or towards the black end. The final thing, the next thing down are these 3 little eyedroppers, and you'll notice these 3 little eyedroppers are grayed out. And the reason that they are grayed out is because we are on the master channel. You actually have to pick one of the color channels in the drop down or use the targeting adjustment tool to do that for you in order for these things to become active. But what they will allow you to do is either increase your saturation level or increase your color range or decrease your color range. And then finally, the 2 sets of bars that are on the very bottom. These are the really important ones. And the way these bars actually work, you can actually see if you grab the hue slider and shift it all the way to one side or shift it back, you'll notice that the top bar does not move at all. The bottom bar moves when you actually make these adjustments. What that's showing you is, just like we have that split view with our curves, showing you the before and afters, these 2 color bars are actually showing you the befores and afters. However, these 2 color bars can also show you selected color range, which is what we really want to sort of get to here. So to start this whole process, what I want to do is target the problem area here, and we're going to explore it here on the color in this hue saturation box, to try to restrict the change that we need to make only to the area that we need to make it to. And so this is how to do it. Grab the targeting adjustment tool at the very top. It's much more accurate than trying to pick which color channel, but which of the drop-down colors that we need to actually use. And come over here again, make sure that your blurry layer is on, and I'm simply going to click right under that number 1. And what you'll see happen is this. Those eyedroppers down at the bottom are now active. They actually, the one in the very beginning on the left-hand side will select a completely different area. So you could use it to, say, select the color of the bra or the color of her shirt, or if there was a color background, it'll completely change the area that is selected. The one that's next to it will actually add to the selection. So if you're happy with what has been selected, you're fine. If you want to expand that selection, you can use the plus eyedropper, and you would simply click on another area of another color. If you wanted to restrict the area and actually make it narrower, then that's the minus eyedropper that's next to it. We're going to avoid colorize right now. But the color bar itself is important to understand the anatomy of the color bar. So you will see that right between these 2 things, there are 4 little markers. There is, the one on the far left-hand side is supposed to look like a ramp going up. Then you have 2 solid lines, and then you get to the final marker on the right-hand side, and that's supposed to be a ramp going down. So what this is telling us is that any change that we make to this image, any of the colors that sits right between the 2 uprights that are in the middle, will be affected 100%. It will be completely changed 100%. As you start to move from the solid bar that's in the middle, one of those to the one on the left, or the other one to the one on the right, the impact of the color shift that we make, whether we're changing the hue, saturation, or lightness, ramps down to 0. And the reason this helps us is that it gives us a gradual color shift and a gradual color change. However, the problem that I have with this is that this is a really abstract thing. I mean, it's showing me the areas that it thinks need to be impacted by this, but I want to know for certain what part of my image is actually going to be changed. So to do that, I want you to take your hue saturation, the hue slider at the very top, and drag it all the way to the right. And we're going to actually change the color of this completely. And what this is going to do is it's actually showing us the area that's being impacted by, ultimately, if we accept this color range, this is the range that's going to be actually impacted by this. I don't want to impact all the skin. I simply want to impact the sunburned area. So this gives me a preview of what's going to be changed in this. Some people will actually bump up the saturation guy as well so that you can just get a little bit better idea of what's really going on. We'll see if that works or not. I personally don't really think you need it, but anyway, there you go. If you click in the middle area of those two uprights that are in the two, so I'm looking at the two color bars, the before and after bars that are sitting down at the very bottom. If you click right in the middle between those two upright bars, you can actually slide this entire thing in one direction or another. And you see as I start to pull in one direction, it will actually start to, there's parts of her skin now, her arms, I'm actually sliding the whole thing more towards the magenta area. And you can actually see now that the area that is being most impacted by this radical shift in hue and saturation, I'm starting to bring back the natural color of her arms. So this is telling me that this is, again, it was misdirected. The color sampler tool was way too deep in the reds. It needed to be much more closer to the magenta areas here. However, I'm going to zoom in on this just a little bit more so we can see the image a little bit bigger. We're not done quite yet in this guy, so this gets me more in the range. You can now click on one of the upright bars and you can actually slide it. I'm going to click on the one on the left. I'm going to drag it to the right to actually narrow this range a little bit more. And what you'll see is that it actually is starting to bring back in that skin on her arm. So that was a mistake to actually do that. So I'm going to grab the other upright bar and start to pull it to the left to see if it starts to get rid of more of that skin. Again, I don't ever want to lose the part on her chest. I want that part to always be impacted by this, but I'm trying to reduce the areas so that it doesn't impact, so that it doesn't change the skin color of any of other parts of her. Now, at this stage of the game, I might accept it the way it is right now because my guess is she probably has a little bit of sunburn on her. If her chest is that burnt, there's probably a good chance that she's got a little bit of sunburn on her arms as well. However, we can take the fall-off sliders, the ones that are at both the far right and the far left, and we can adjust those two to see if we can't fine-tune this just a little bit better. So I'm going to start on the right-hand side, and I'm going to click and I'm going to start to drag it in, and you can see that is definitely where that guy actually lives. So this is the one that's controlling the majority of the fall off, and it's going to be a split here. I want to make sure that I keep all of her chest still selected, even if I have to select part of her arm, because I can always use this layer mask to remove the correction from her right arm if I need to. I'm going to grab the slider on the other side, again, the drop-off slider on the far left-hand side, and I'm going to pull it in as a little bit as well and see if that changes that dynamic at all. It doesn't have a really huge impact on this image, so I'm going to pretty much leave it where it is right now. So now at least I feel like I've got the area that I'm trying to target much better defined than when I was at the very beginning. Does this make sense to everyone? Is this working for everyone? All right, then I'm going to zero my sliders back out again. If you double click on them, they should zero out, but they don't. So select hue and change it back to 0. Select your saturation, change that back to 0 as well. And so now for me, I don't need to see the blurred version of this anymore, so I'm going to throw the blurred version away. And for the most part, this is in part a hue issue, and this is also in part a lightness issue. It's not really a saturation issue, I don't think. But I'm going to grab the hue slider and start to drag it to the right just a little bit and do it kind of carefully. And all of a sudden you'll see the red miraculously disappear. I'm then going to go to the lightness slider because, again, the sunburn has caused it to be a little bit darker. And I'm also going to lighten this up slightly. Again, that's only targeting that one area. I take that back. Look at this. The minute I did that, when I zeroed those colors out, it got rid of my targeted selection. So I'm going to go back in history to where I was deleting that layer, and then I think what happened is that when I selected those numbers and zeroed them out, it went back to the master level. So I'm going to come back and look at the reds, And if you go back to the red channel, you can see those areas are still selected. We've still got that drop-down menu there. I think all of this is buggy in Photoshop. It's absolutely absurd to me that if I type in a value here that it returns back to master. So now I'm going to try that same move again because I was picking up a lot of green in the whole overall image. So now I'm going to take the hue slider and start to push that slightly to the right. And then again, I think it's a little bit too dark, so don't mistake the darkness of that area on the top of her boobs for being sunburn. I'm going to push the lightness up a little bit. And then push the color just a little bit more. And the lightness a little bit more. And this is now the difference that we have. And if you zoom in really close on this guy, you'll also notice you don't have that blotchy effect because we really did target the areas that were the darker red were more targeted than the areas that were a little bit less red. And so basically this was where ultimately I would end up. Now you could say that it's still showing a little bit too much darkness in here. At this stage of the game, I would not rely on the lightness slider here to lift that anymore. I would simply add a tonal retouch layer on top of this to match the color of the skin tone right here with more of the color of her, either her chest or her bottom or her belly or something like that. But this is the difference and it goes so quick. Are there questions about this? So anytime you get a picture of me, this is what you do. I retouch all my family photographs. For my mother does a Christmas card every year, and my mother's convinced that she goes, you're just a miracle worker with that camera. You're just a genius photographer, because I always knock 15, 20 years off of her. I do the same thing for myself. I retouched a passport picture of myself, because you get to turn in your own passport pictures. If I could turn in my driver's license picture, I would be 16 again. But at any rate, I retouched my passport picture, and I knocked a solid 10 years off, right? And I showed up the very first time I showed up to passport control. They took a look at it, and they took a look at me, and they took a look at it, and they took a look back at me. They were not really convinced it was me. So I know that you can take that too far. You might just word to the wise. Anyway, we can close this up. We don't need to save that. Okay, so the next part here, I need to point out a couple things first. I know a lot of you guys are thinking, God, how much more can he throw at us? Apparently quite a bit. So if we go to session 7, that is the one for today. Inside of session 7, there is, I used to split this class up and do something else in addition to split frequency. I'm now trying to devote more time as I can to this. It's a relatively complex subject, so I just want to point out a couple of things, and then we'll actually get in and actually work with them. There's some PDFs here that are definitely worth keeping, because some of these will tell you how to actually do the split work. Some of these things, like the mixer brush settings, if you've never, how many people in here have ever used the mixer brush in Photoshop? Okay, so not that many of you. Again, it plays a much bigger role in the work that we're actually going to do here, but I'll show you how that all plays out. There is the ultimate guide to frequency separation. And then there's finally another PDF that is a setup for how to do, it's a non-destructive setup for doing split frequency work. And I'll explain all of this as we go along. But I can just tell you right now that when you first start doing this work, have this guide handy, because actually doing the split, there's nothing intuitive about doing the split. There's nothing that makes really a whole lot of sense about doing the split. The controls and the steps that you have to take. After a while, it will become like second nature to you, and you'll be fine. But so anyway, just to point out that these PDFs exist. They also exist on our website. Do yourself a favor. Download these, keep them handy for when you're doing this work, just so that you can always refer back to it, especially if you go 6 months without doing any split work. There's a fairly good chance you're not going to remember how to do the split. And so anyway, that's what's basically going on here. If you click on the folder that says Frequency Separation Images, There is a file inside of that called Split Frequency Retouching. If you could open that guy up for me, that would be great. Another picture of another girl on green. My wife is a hair and makeup artist, and we do a lot of work together, and she is so tired of shooting shit on green screen. She could scream until she gets the pictures. And then she gets the pictures, and she's like, oh my God, that's... Anyway. I need everybody to zoom in really close to this girl's face. And so I'm in like at around 200%, and I'm looking basically at her mouth area here. So the first thing about split frequency that you need to realize is what that really means. What are frequencies, and why are we talking about frequencies? Most people know that, you know, they're radio frequencies or light wave frequencies or all that kind of stuff, but you're not going to see this on the video. You will hear this, but I'm going to show this to you on the whiteboard back here really quick. It's only going to take a second. So if we look at this area, now pretty much where this hand is, it's actually on my screen right here. If we look at this area right in here, if we were to take our mouse and run it across this here, you would get very, very, very little change. The tone is pretty consistent. The color is pretty consistent. So this is what we call low frequency. So when we talk about frequency, it's all about wave. So if we look at a wave like this would be a low frequency wave. And what that's showing you is that it takes a very long time for any real serious change to happen. However, if we look at the area that is her lips, in that case, that is what we would call high frequency. What's happening there is things are changing really fast. I'm going light to dark, colors changing. That's high frequency. In a better way of thinking of this, instead of trying to think of it in frequencies, is we can actually label them. And so this is what I want you to think about in low and high frequency. Low frequency represents tone and color. High frequency represents detail. And those are the things that we are going to try to split from one another so that we can retouch them independent of each other. So again, low frequency is color and tone. High frequency is detail. It's the best way to think about it. And so the problem that we have a lot of times, and the reason I use this file, because I think this is a really solid, it's a really good file to actually demonstrate the challenge. If you look at the light direction from this image, you can see that the right side of her face is much lighter than the dark side of her face. So we've actually got side lighting that's coming across. And if you take a look at this upper part of her lip right here, you can see that this is very light. And if you take a look at the other side of her lip, you can see it's actually dropping down in shadow. And as I go from this upper area up in here, right under her nostril, as I start to move down, you can see that the skin tone actually gets darker and darker and darker as we move down. That darkness is low frequency. That shift in tone is all low frequency. The fine little hairs that are sitting on her face right in that same lip area right here, that is detail. That is high frequency. So in normal doing this work, normally if we were to try to retouch this thing, if you were to try to go in and use the clone stamp tool, healing brush tool, the problem that you run into is that depending on what your source is, you are going to bring that color information to this area. And so when you get rid of the hair, you're also going to change the tone that is in this area, and you can spot the retouch. Does that make sense to everybody, what's going on, what that challenge is? So what I want to do is I don't want to change the color and tone of this. I want to keep that area going into shadow. I need to keep that shadow for this image to be believable. But I want to remove the hair. The hair is detail. So what split frequency will allow me to do is it will allow me to separate the tone and the color on one layer and the detail, the hair, on another layer, and then I can simply retouch the other layer that's got the hair on it, the detail layer, and not worry about affecting the color that's underneath it. Does that make sense to everyone? It probably will as soon as we do the split. All right, so to do this, we're going to start out. You need to make 2 copies. There's a number of ways of doing split frequency work. So wait, hands up again. How many people in here have ever done split frequency work? Have any of you ever done it using high pass, or do you all use it using apply image? Apply image. Anybody else? Has anybody ever done it using high pass filter? Then I'm going to hold off on showing you high pass filter until next week. The results that you get are the same, and I don't want to confuse you guys anymore, and this is already going to confuse you. Okay, so majority of people do split frequency work using apply image, and that's how I'm going to show you how to do it first. But I'm also going to show you an alternate way of doing it, and if not next week, maybe the week after, at some point, whatever, because it gives you a different approach to your image. Again, the results that you get at the end of it all are identical. It's just how the steps that you get there. So anyway, we'll do the way most people know it first. Okay, so make 2 copies of your background layer. Command J, Command J. Double click on the one in the middle, and you're going to name it low. And just for the rest of your life, you can always call it low, but for today, right now, I want you to also add color and tone. So to help you remember what this layer really is going to be. Then click on the upper layer, and we are going to call this high detail. And then turn off the eyeball for high detail and select low color and tone. Now, a lot of people will argue, and I'm one of them that sort of agrees with this, you should do this at 100%. So I'm simply selecting the zoom view right under my screen, and I'm going to do it at 100%. And this matters because what we're going to actually do now is we're going to blur this layer to the point that we've lost our detail. But the more zoomed in or the more zoomed out you are can have an impact on your perception of detail. So a lot of people would say it makes sense to do this always at the same zoom level, to do it at 100%. So that's where I'm going to actually start mine at 100%. And then we're going to blur this image. So come up to the filter menu, come down to blur, down to Gaussian Blur. And we're going to actually start to blur this. I'm going to kick this down to down around like a 1.6. And what I'm looking to do is I want to blur this image to the point that I don't really see detail anymore. Now, again, that detail can be something of a relative term, but what I'm looking for here is to say definitely lose the fine little hairs that are on the side of her face, that kind of stuff. So I'm just going to start bumping this up. You can use your arrow keys to do this, and I'm just going to keep hitting my arrow keys up. And what I'm looking for is I'm trying to reach a place where, for instance, I'm going to zoom into this just so that you can see it, to the point that her eyebrows really don't have any distinguishable hairs in them anymore. It has tone and it has color, but I don't see any detail in there. Again, if you use your preview button to turn this on and off, you'll see that it's going from one where I've got all fine hair, a little detail here, till the point that I'm up around this. I'm up at a 4.7 here. That detail actually goes away, and I end up with just color and tone there. So I'm going to zip around here and take a look. I actually think this is possibly a little bit too high. So I'm going to, again, use my down arrow keys to drop this back down again. I'm going to go back down to 100%. Oh, it's not going to let me change my percentage while I'm actually in the same dialog box. So I'm going to land, I think, somewhere around 4 pixels is roughly where I think I've probably lost the detail part of it pretty well. So what is remaining here for the most part, again, is color and tone. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK to that. Then so this is now my low frequency layer. all I've really got in here is color and tone. I don't have detail in here anymore. Even if you think of these little lines on her face here, that kind of stuff, that is in large measure differences in color and tone. That is not detail. So now I actually need to create the highlight detail, the high frequency detail part. So go ahead and turn on the eyeball for high frequency, select high frequency. Yes?
Can you go back to, did you put it at 40?
No.
What did you put it at for the blur? Because my blur went out.
4. Yeah, not 40.
Okay, 4. Okay.
Good?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, turn on the eyeball for your high detail layer. Make that layer active. So now here's the trick, and this is the hardest part for people to well, it's not the hardest part for people to get. Most people would just walk you through the recipe right now. I'm going to actually tell you what we're doing. So what we are doing is that we've now created all the low frequency is sitting in that middle layer. There's no high frequency in it. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a copy of that layer and I'm going to subtract the low part that's sitting in the middle layer, and what I will be left with is the high frequency and the detail. Does that make sense, everyone? So that's why how you go after this can change, but at any rate, so I've got the top layer, high layer detail is selected. Up to the image menu, down to apply image. And most of you guys have probably never seen this dialog box. It doesn't matter. We actually get into using this quite a bit at the end of this class, but this is what you use to actually do the split work. So with the apply image dialog box open, you need to click on the drop down menu for layer. Again, the source doesn't matter. You've only got one image open. If you had multiple images open, you would be able to select a different image. We don't, and doing split work, you never will, so you don't need to do anything for the source. For the layer that's underneath it, you do need to click on that, and you need to come down to the low color and tone layer and select that. Again, what I'm setting this up to do is I'm saying I am going to, well, here, let me finish doing the setup and then I'll explain it to you. In the blending mode, as we come down, click on the drop down for the blending mode and come down to subtract. And then finally, you want to leave the opacity at 100%, the scale at 2, and the offset at 128. So without getting too deep into this, basically what we are trying to do here is we are trying to create almost what would be a black and white layer that gives us the detail. You'll notice that there's very little color in here. Again, we are trying to remove the color and the tone from this image. You'll also notice that the majority of this image now is approaching middle gray. You do have darker areas that show the eye, lighter areas that show the mustache, but the vast majority of this image is a middle gray, and the advantage of that is that we're going to change the blending mode of this, and much like our soft white layer, anything that is 50% gray goes away. So this is how we are subtracting the color and tone essentially from this image and leaving just the detail behind. So that's what this setup is all about. If you are doing this in 8-bit, this is how it's set up. If you are doing it in 16-bit, you use a slightly different formula. And I'm going to show that to you right now. So if you go back to the Ultimate Guide to Split Frequency Technique, and you open this up, and you come down a couple of pages, this will actually talk to you in greater detail about what low and high frequency really are. I just want to point out, though, that this is the part that exists that you need to be aware of. If you are working in 8-bit color, which is what we are primarily are doing, this is your setup, and you can see it's exactly what we've done. We've got our low frequency layers selected, we are subtracting it, a scale of 2 and an offset of 128. If you are in 16-bit, because of the way Photoshop calculates it, you set it up differently. You actually still do the low layer, however, in this case you invert it. You set your blending mode to add, and your offset is 0. So just to be aware, none of you so far have turned in anything to me where you're working in 16-bit. But if you are, the split will not work, because what we're looking for is, at the end of all of this, is that the two layers that we've split should be exactly identical to our original layer. And that's why these settings are different here. So back to our image. I'm going to go ahead and say OK to this, and it looks like this gray image. However, now at the end of all of this, you click on your drop-down menu to change the blending mode from normal down to linear light. To make sure that the split worked correctly, hold down your Shift key and select the middle layer. So now I've got both layers are selected. My high and my low layer are both selected. Come to the little menu on the right-hand side across from the tab that says Layers. Click on the drop-down menu, and you want to actually do a new group from layers, and you name this Split Frequency. And say OK. It puts those two into a group, and the only reason we've really done this, and there's a number of reasons of doing it, it's easier to mask both layers doing it this way, but most importantly, turn the eyeball on and off and see if you see any shift in your image at all. If you see anything change, you've done the split wrong, and you need to go back and fix it. In my case, I'm turning it on and off, and I don't see any shift on this at all. Even if I zoom back out, turn this guy on and off, I see no shift in this at all. But indeed, my layers are split. So I am actually going to then take a look at these, and I'm going to zoom into that area that I was talking about. We're going to start with the mustache part that's on her, not really mustache, the fine little hairs that are on her upper lip. I mean, let's be kind here, right? So I want to remove these, but again, I don't want to remove the shadowing, the tone, and the color in this at all. So to do this, I'm going to work only on my high layer. A lot of people, and this is maybe not a bad habit to, I don't know if this is not how I learned it, but this is how I practice it now. You can actually do this work without seeing the low layer or any of the image as well. You can do it looking only at the high detail. If you want to do it that way, we'll do it both ways, but I'll show you. If you want to do it that way, you can hold down the Option key and simply click on the eyeball for the top, and you'll actually see this is what I've got. And this is what I need to replace. This is the, the reason I think sometimes it's easier to work it this way is that you can also spot areas where you want to steal content from to actually replace this. Because the advantage of working with split frequency, and this was something I was talking to you about last week when we were talking about doing tonal retouching, the holy grail of doing tonal retouching is to maintain texture. So if we're doing this kind of work here, we want to maintain the texture of the skin as it would exist underneath this girl's lip. And we can do that using the skin texture that's sitting around her. So as I'm looking at the area that's over here to the left-hand side, that's going to be the skin texture that I actually bring and replace in this new area right here. I do not want to use the area that's on the other side of her lip, because you see the lip that's over here, it has no detail in it at all. It's a highlight that has blown out and there is no detail in it. If I use that on the other side, it will look fake. Again, you see all of this skin texture on the other side because it's being cross-lit, it's in shadow. The area that's on her upper lip on the right-hand side is flat into that light, and therefore it has no texture. So this, again, helps you pre-visualize where you actually want to use to actually fix this stuff. So to do this, you use the healing brush tools or the clone stamp tool. So any of the healing brush tools will work. So the one where Photoshop actually picks this for you, the spot healing brush, the one where you can actually pick it, the normal healing brush. The patch tool is another one that works really well in here. And then finally the clone stamp tool, that will also work in here as well. So I'm going to go after this using the patch tool. It's usually my first go-to tool, especially for work like this. So I'm going to show you how I'm going to use the tool. We'll start with it on just this layer, and then we'll do a little bit of the same work looking at the whole image to see what's really going on. So to do the tool, I do it in increments because you don't want to actually, because this tool will literally replace the exact texture of one area in place of the area that's got the fine little hairs in it. And we want it to be more random than that. I don't want to take one big chunk of her skin and put it in this area and call it a day because you'll get the repeating pattern. So I am going to pick the patch tool. And again, remember what the patch tool is. You select the area that's the problem first and then drag that selection to the area of the skin that you want to replace the problem area. So I'm going to circle right around the little hairs that are right underneath her nostril. I've got a marching ants. I put my cursor in the middle and I simply am going to drag this off to the left side and let go, and it will actually replace that texture. Command D to deselect. Now, I'm going to continue to do this work all the way down, so I'm just going to select small little increments of this. And again, I'm still pulling to that same left area and then hitting Command D to deselect. And you can see as I'm continuing to do this work, it's slowly removing that texture, that hair is actually going away on my detail layer. If you want to see what happens in the whole image, so you can see this in real time, go ahead and turn on your color layer that's actually underneath, and you can see right now I have removed all of those hairs that are sitting up at the top, and what I've replaced them with is skin that actually has texture to it from this right side, from the left side of her cheek over here. So I'm not just blasting this out, I'm not smudging this, I'm not making this, for me that's what I think so many of the healing brush tools actually do. If you're doing this just on a full frequency layer that's got both that's got both high and low frequencies together, I think it just tends to mush all of this stuff up. So in this method it doesn't. I'm still working on my high detail layer, and I'm still going to actually do it using my the patch tool. I'm going to go after a little bit more serious of an area right here because I think I can. And I'm simply going to drop that down, hit Command D to deselect, and you'll see exactly what I was talking about. That small mole area, or that little sort of dark freckle area that was right underneath that was a part of that selection that I just made, remains behind. It is being colored. It's actually, there's new texture in there, replacing the hair that was on the side of her face. But I still keep that mole area is still in there. Now I may choose to retouch that out as well, but that will happen on a different layer. And then finally I'm going to go after the last little hairs that are sitting down at the bottom. And again, take care of that. Command D to deselect. And then there's a one right there. So if you want to see the before and after, use your eyeball that's right next to the group split frequency, and you can turn this off. Make sure your bottom layer is turned on, and you can turn that guy on and off, and you can see that it's actually replaced all of those hairs, but it's replaced it with skin texture. It has also not impacted the tonal range that's sitting underneath it. I've still got that freckle there. This whole thing is still in shadow. None of that has been changed at all. So I'm off to the races in terms of using this. So the next thing I'm going to do is actually look at the low frequency layer by itself. So I'm going to come and hold down the, I'm going to hover over the eyeball for the low frequency layer. I'm going to hold down the Option key and click on it. So now all I'm seeing is the low layer, and now I can see the problems here that I need to fix. So if I do want to remove that mole, I can actually see on the low layer not only where it is, but also where I need to sample from. So again, I typically do this work not looking at the whole image. I actually do it looking at these individual layers. But again, everybody does this differently. So, and sometimes I get bored with how I'm doing it and I'll change how I do it, but nonetheless, we're going to go after the low layer right now. I'm still going to stay with the patch tool. I am going to actually select this area that is that mole, and it's saying it can't do that because it's hidden. My high detail layer is still active. That's why I can't do that. Make sure that you've got your low layer is active and visible. This is all low layer work now. So again, I've got my selection over the mole. I'm going to bring it up to the top and let go. That takes care of that. I've got another area down here that seems a little discolored. I'm going to lighten that up. The line that's coming down, the crease line that's coming down in her face is also going to be visible here. Again, if we turn on our full image, you can see what I'm talking about. It's this area that's right in here. It's actually a dark area. It's this line that's happening right down in here. I want to actually get rid of that line. We'll do this one with the whole image visible so you can actually see the impact that it's having on this. I don't want to change the texture of this. The texture is fine. I've got little skin in there. I've got a little bit of hair in there, whatever. The skin texture is fine and believable. I don't need to change that part. What I need to change is, again, the tone and the color causing that line. So still using the patch tool, I'm going to actually select the whole bottom half of that darkening. And then I'm going to pull this more to the inside because I'm worried that I'm actually going to start heading too much to the outside of her cheek, which is going into deeper shadow. So this will actually help fix that part without, it'll stay in the more lighter tone. I'm going to let go of that part, Command D to deselect, and then I'm going to do the same thing for the continuation of that line that's a little bit higher up on her cheek, closer to her nose. And again, you'll see that the texture in that did not change at all. That was strictly the tonal part in there. Again, if you want to see the before and after, make sure your bottom layer's on, and then use the eyeball that's right next to your split frequency part, and you can actually see this is a much less damaging retouch move. I'm going to head over to the other side of her face, and if you look, there's it's sort of like it's either a mole or a pimple or something that's right underneath her nose on the left-hand side, more on the right-hand side. This ends up being both. If you hold down your Option key and you click on the eyeball, you can see that discoloration, the darker area is sitting there in your high layer. However, if you hold down the Option key and click on the eyeball for your low layer, you'll also see it there. In this case, you've got to remove it from both. Now, there are certain people that get really good at doing this split work, and this is one of the challenges that you've got here. So people always say to me, well, how much blurring should I do to get rid of the detail? How much of all that kind of stuff? What you'll end up realizing as you do this over and over and over is that when you're starting to do this, the initial, either the blurring or the other method that I can show you, which actually does detail first, so you actually keep detail first. What you realize is that what I'm trying to do is, when I'm doing the initial split, is I'm trying to say, okay, areas like this, I want them to be on just one layer. I don't want them, this is a problem right now that they're on both. I mean, it's gonna work, we're gonna fix it. But in a perfect world, you would get only the stuff on one layer that would be detail that needs to be fixed, and only color and tone on the other layer that needs to be fixed, and not worry about anything where they cross over in the middle. But that's not where we're at right now, so we've got to do it on both. So I'm going to turn on both layers. I'm going to start it with my high layer first. So I'm up on my high layer. It is selected. I'm going to still use the patch tool, and I'm going to circle this. And in this case, here, I'm going to hit Command D to deselect. I need everybody to look at this because this is also where you get into deep trouble doing split work. If you look at this area on my screen right here, you can see that just if we think this is 12 o'clock on a clock face, if I go down here till like 2 or 3 o'clock, I have detail in the skin that should match this area right here. If I continue up on heading towards her nose, if I stayed pretty close to that area, the texture would be roughly about the same. As I get really close to her nose, though, that texture changes completely, and that would not be a place for me to sample from. By the same token, if I look at this same area, if I start to move up towards the upper right-hand corner, the texture of the skin that sits up here is not the same as what would be down here. And certainly if I go down to her upper lip, the texture or the lack of texture that's on her upper lip would not match this spot at all. So where you choose to actually, your source and your destination we're going to pick. But the source is critical in this part. And for me, the most convincing source part sits down here in this bottom part right here. So again, moving more towards that 2 or 3 o'clock. So that's what I'm going to do in terms of the texture part of this. So I'm going to circle this. Again, I'm working on my high layer, and I'm going to drag this down to keep texture in here, to not let that go. Command D to deselect, and you can see that there's still a stain there, and that's fine because that is now low layer work. So I'm going to select my low layer, and I'm going to circle this very same thing again. But now in terms of where I go for my source, if I simply go straight down again, there's a sort of a darker area that's right down here. I'm not sure that that's where I really want it. I feel like in a way from a color point of view, maybe something more straight out to the side makes more sense. And I'm going to let go of that. Command D to deselect. And then again, turn on your bottom layer, turn on the split frequency on and off. And you can see we've actually replaced this with texture. There's no way that you would look at that and say, oh, they've just blown all the texture out of this and there's nothing to be seen anymore. Is this making sense to everybody what's going on here? Guys, this shit will change your life. So you remember we were talking about what I was calling the 3 different stages of retouching, the 3 different levels of retouching, right? You've got the friend that's offering you $100 to do 10 of their images. It's full-length fashion, and you say, sure, I'll do it, and you want to knock it out in 10 minutes because that'll make $600 an hour, decent rate. You go in there with a healing brush tool, and you just smack the shit out of it. Clone stamp tool, you don't care. No texture in the face, who cares? It's a shot about fashion anyway. So that's one extreme. The other extreme was the $20,000 retouch job. They're giving you a picture of, who do we want to retouch today? Who would you say is the most, I don't know, beautiful man, beautiful woman? Rihanna. Fine, we're going to do Rihanna. All right. 20 grand to do that. You are not going to go in there with the client. You're going to do that tonally. But there has to be a place in the middle. And that's where split frequency lands in my book. So for me, when I'm doing really high-end beauty for my book, it's strictly beauty, that kind of stuff. It's probably 30% split frequency, 70% tonal retouching. Anything that I'm doing for my fashion book, though, if I'm pulled back and it's really about the clothes, it's more 70, 80% split frequency, 10, 20%, 30% tonal retouching. Does that make sense? So anyway, all right. We can close this image up. We're going to look at a couple of other images here really quickly in that same group. So in the split frequency images, let me see what else I've got in here. Yeah, this will be a pretty good one. Let's go ahead and do the wrinkled green skirt. So this actually, you should know about this. Let me see if I can find it really quickly. What is her name? Mindful Retouch. This is an amazing source that you guys should actually go to. I'm not sure. Ooh. Oh my. Oh well, this woman was an amazing retoucher. Clearly, and I don't know when this actually happened. Probably the last time I was on this site was 6 months ago or something. Don't worry, I wanted to give her credit because this image comes from actually from her. But this looks like this is a possibly a recent occurrence of what's going on in Eastern Europe, which is very sad. Anyway. I was going to direct you to, again, Anastasia. I don't have any idea how to say her last name. I personally love to give credit to the sources that have helped inform me and develop my skill set, that kind of stuff. and she is definitely one of them. The two things that I'm going to show you right now, one is the image of the skirt that we're going to work on right now is actually from her website, and actually two, the brush that we're going to actually use to do this work is also a tip that I picked up from her. So anyway, I certainly hope she's okay. That's very sad. Of course, this whole situation is very sad. So anyway, back to this image. So the challenge on this image is to get rid of the wrinkles of the skirt. And the issue that we would have in doing this is that if we were going to try to do this tonally, it would take a very long time. But again, not impossible to do. But again, we would actually have to do two sets of colors to do the tonal work. The browns that we would, or the tans that we would actually use for this side of the skirt would be one set of colors, but then we would have to change them to the green set of colors over here. And then you would simply go in, and just like we've done tonal work before here, in this area that's lighter in here, we would make it darker. The area that's darker in here, we would actually make it lighter. So that would be what was going on in here. But it would be really, really difficult to do. The other option that we would have in here is that we've actually got some relatively smooth fabric over here that we could actually use the healing stamp, the healing brush to actually fix the areas that are in here. Well, here, let's look at it. Let's just make a copy of this layer, Command J. And let's grab the healing brush. So I'm going to do the spot healing brush. We'll see how well that guy works. Again, this is where Adobe will actually pick the color for you. I'm going to come over here, make it a little bit larger, and check my brush edge. And 50% hardness is good. Make sure you have content aware on. We don't need to worry about sampling all layers because we're only going to be working on this layer. And then I'm just going to paint over this sort of shadow area, highlight area, and see what happens. And let go. And it does a shitty job of it. Look how bad that is. It's like really blotchy. It looks like it almost made it worse. I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that, and instead go to the next one down, the regular healing brush tool, and make my brush a little bit larger. And also check its edge. 50% hardness is fine. Normal blending mode on this, we will go ahead and leave it as aligned and working on the current layer. And then I'm going to come over to I'm actually going to take it from the top right here and see if I can sample that and actually paint down into it. So hold down the Option key, click, and come down and paint and sort of get rid of that part right there. And that worked a little bit better. And continue to come down to get rid of that part. I've got repeating pattern in here, but I could continue to work on that. However, the problem being is that if I keep this as my source and I come over here to smooth out these areas of wrinkle right here, you can actually see, the healing brush tool is doing exactly what it should do. It's replacing the texture of this area over here, and then it's using the surrounding area of color to actually blend the color in. So the tool is actually working really well. But you can see there's issues with this. I've got patchiness in here. I could work this all day long and I might be able to get it to ultimately work. But if we come in here and take a look at this, this is exactly what I was talking to you. This is what happens to skin. If we turn this on and off, we go from a completely different texture. I've got old texture and new texture that's mixing. I've got pattern that's actually coming into this. So yes, could I eventually do this using the healing brush tool or the clone stamp tool? I could, but it will take me forever. Not going to do that. So I'm going to throw this layer away. Instead, we're going to split this. So again, your first job, I'm just thrown away. I'm back to my original layer. Two copies, Command J. Double click on the one that's in the middle, and we're going to call it Low Color and Tone. And the next one up, we're going to double click on that. We're going to call it High Detail. Turn off the eye for high detail. Select the layer in the middle, the Low Color and Tone. And then again, we're going to split this. So I'm going to zoom in to 100%, and I'm sort of like looking. So for me, things like the stitching are details. Clearly the texture in the fabric is detail. So I'm going to blur this. So up to the filter menu, down to blur, down to Gaussian blur. And it comes in at my 4, sort of where I was at before. And this to me actually seems pretty good. I'm going to push this up a little bit higher and see if I can bury a little bit more of that stitching. And I feel like it goes a little bit more here at a radius pixel of 5. So I'm going to accept 5 here. I'm going to say that's where I actually want to be with this guy. So that's going to be the way I pick this one. And I'm going to go ahead and say OK to that. So that takes care of my low layer. So now this layer only contains my low frequency color and tone. I'm going to select my high layer now by selecting it in the layers palette, turn the eyeball on so that I can actually see this. Up to the image menu, down to apply image. And in apply image, in the drop down dialog box for layer, click the drop down and you want to pick low color and tone. In the blending mode, you want to pick subtract, which is sticky right now, but it will not be sticky if you quit Photoshop and turn it back on again. Every time you start Photoshop up again, the blending mode of apply image always defaults to multiply, which doesn't matter. I'm merely pointing out it will not be sticky. As long as I've got Photoshop open, these settings will actually stay in here. The only thing you really have to select is the color layer. And then I'm going to say OK to that. So now I've got my high and low layer. I need to change the blending mode of my high layer. So I'm going to click on the drop down blending mode and change it down to linear light. I'm going to hold down the shift key and select both the high and the low layer because I want to put them into a group. I'm going to click on the little drop flyout menu that's right across from the layers palette and say new group from layers and call it split frequency. And say OK to that. So what I'm now looking at, if we turn off the high detail and you look at the low detail, you can see what the problem is. This is what is causing those big wrinkles. If you zoom into this, you do not see any of the fabric detail. If you want to see the fabric detail, you have to turn on the high detail. That's where all of it is. So here, this is just color and tone. So this actually helps out quite a bit. However, and again, this is a trick that I got from that poor woman of Mindful Retouch to use to actually smooth this part out. Now, there's a number of tools that we could actually use, and again, this would be a great time to have a tablet, and I don't have one, but I'm going to show you a couple of different ways of actually doing this. The first is I'm going to start on the sort of the tan side that's over on to the right-hand side. We're going to go after the wrinkle that's up at the very top. So you can do this using just a regular paintbrush. So again, I typically do this work with only the low layer showing. That's just me. There's no reason that you can't do it with both layers showing. It's just for me that seems a little bit easier to pick. There's fewer distractions, so I can pick colors that I feel like should be in this spot a little bit easier, a little bit better. So that's what I'm going to go with. So to do it, I'm going to hit the B key to get a brush. Again, I'm going to select my low layer that's got color and tone on it. Make sure that your brush now is completely soft. I am. I'm going to leave it as a normal blending mode, 100% opacity, and I'm going to keep my flow around 5%, and we'll sort of see what ends up happening. I'm going to make my brush a little bit larger, and what I'm really thinking about doing is I'm going to try to paint in this darker area using the color that's either above it or below it. I can resample to get both. So make my brush a little bit smaller. I am going to hover over the upper area here that gives me the tone, the sort of like general tone of the skirt. Not the highlight part of it, not the shadow part of it, but sort of a middle general tone. There's another area that's right down here that's got also tone as well. They're not exactly the same, so sort of mixing this up is not the worst idea in the world that you can actually run into. So I'm going to start here at the top, hold down the Option key and click. That samples that as the color, and then I simply start to paint around this image right in here, looking to lift that shadow and also to darken the highlight that's actually in there. That seems a little bit slow to me, so I'm going to bump my flow up to 10%. I'm going to resample color that's down here a little bit below it now. Again, I'm trying to mix color in here so that I don't end up with just some one solid hunk. I'm going to resample up here, and I'm sort of continuing to go around here. Again, don't forget the highlight part of it as well. And I'm just sort of like smoothing that out. I'm going to turn on my high layer, and to see what the difference now is that again, I can turn my split layer on and off, and you can see it's done a very good job of removing that wrinkle, but I still have all the tone, all the texture is still sitting in here. I haven't touched the texture at all. So that's one way to go about doing it. However, that requires that you resample, resample, resample. You do a lot of that work here. For me, there's an easier way of actually doing this. So I'm going to go back in history to bring that same piece back again. So if you look at your history palette, I can come up where it says create group from layers. I'm going to simply click on that. It brings the big wrinkle back. I'm still only going to look at it here, but now I'm actually going to do the same process, being able to see the entire image that has all the texture in it as well. So again, I'm going to be working on my low layer on the color and tone, but I'm going to leave on the high layer so that I can actually watch this happen and see how the image will ultimately end up in its entirety. However, this time I'm going to use a different tool altogether, and it is the magic brush. So if you click on my brush palette, if you take a look at mine right now, I've actually clicked on it and it's come open, and I don't have that as a tool option right here. It's one of the things that's driving me the most crazy about Photoshop right now is that Photoshop keeps reinventing my toolbar for me. And it's driving me nuts because I have to keep doing this. However, it's a relatively simple fix. If you don't have the tool, and you also notice that all my healing tools are split apart individually. In most cases, in your all's case, is your healing brush, are they grouped together or are they blown apart? Mine keep blowing apart like this. It drives me nuts. I don't need that extra real estate. So at any rate, to fix that, come up to your edit menu. Guys, just do this with me really quickly just so you can see how this thing works. So I've got the customized toolbar window that's actually open. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger right here. And you can see that the extra tools that will be on the right side over here, and one of those tools on the right side is the mixer brush tool. That's the one that I'm actually going to go after. It's not a part of my brush set. So to get to my brush set, I'm going to actually scroll down, and I come down to here to the brush tools, and now I can grab my mixer brush, drag it on top, make sure if you drag it underneath, you see where my blue line is? It's actually right between the brush set and the clone set. It will then stay out on its own. In order to make it a part of the brush set, you lift it up till you actually get the blue line actually in that group and then let go. And you'll see it puts the mixer brush in there. As far as having the tools separate from one another, the spot healing brush and patch tools separate, you can click on things on the left-hand column and bring them up to then nest them into each other so that it works more like the original one actually would. Once you get this set up the way you like it to be, because you can customize this to your heart's content, you can move stuff around, that you can like move the selection sets all the way to the bottom of the toolbar. I mean, you can do anything in here. Once you get it the way you like it, you come over here and you click on Save Preset and give it a name. In my case, I've already done that, and so to get back to the way I like mine set up, I'm going to click on Load Preset, and here's my toolbar right here, and you simply open it and say Done, and now you'll notice I have now the healing set now is all collapsible the way it normally is, and I also in my brush set have the mixer brush. So I want everybody to pick their mixer brush. And here is the trick. You need to know these settings. That's why I've given you a PDF that has just got these settings in it, because otherwise what this tool basically does, or the way it's supposed to work, is it's very akin to if you imagine painting with oils. It's more of an art brush than it is anything else. So if you know anything about painting, if you've watched Bob Rossi, any of that kind of stuff, whatever, you know that paint, because it actually, so let's say I pick up a color paint and put it onto my easel. When I go to pick up more paint, there's always going to be some color left over from the original brush stroke that I did. And as I pick up new paint, those two things mix together. And then if I actually cross a brush stroke that I've already done on my easel with a new brush stroke, there'll be a certain amount of mixing in that part as well. That doesn't really work well for us in doing this kind of retouching. In doing this kind of retouching, what I want to be able to do is I want to essentially be able to click on a point that is a color that I like and drag it across an area that is I want to be fixed, that I want to actually take on some of that original color. But then when I let go, I want a completely new, fresh, clean brush. I don't want that color to stay on there, because let's say I do a stroke here and fix part of this taupe color, and then immediately go over to the green area and try to fix that. When I get to the green area, if I don't do the settings that I'm going to show you, some of that taupe color is going to remain behind in the brush, and then when I hit it onto the green area, it's going to add that taupe color to the green area, which will change its color and not what is going to work for us at all. So this is the settings for your mixer brush that you definitely want. There's only one thing that we're going to be changing in here. So up to the menu in the options palette, again, we're going to click on the drop down option to begin with, and you want to make sure that your hardness is set to 0. You also want to make sure, because I know a couple of people have been doing this, if you open up your general brushes, the two that are at the top are the ones that we work with. Make sure that you do not have one of these brushes that is sensitive to pin pressure selected. So it's one at the very top, soft round brush, 0% hardness, and then I'm going to again click on the name Adobe to get the flyout menu to go away. In the next part that's over, you can actually leave this alone. We are going to use tools to control this. So there's a folder that's got a brush on it, ignore it. There is a swatch on it that's next to it. Yours probably has some tone, color, something in it right now. Don't worry, we're going to fix that part. The next icon over, the next actually two over, are supposed to be buttons. The first button, you do not want it to be pressed, meaning it will not have a dark area around it. The second one you do want pressed. If you hover over it, you'll see what these things say. So the second one over, again, says clean the brush after every stroke. If you have these two buttons set correctly, you should see the transparent checkerboard in your swatch. Does everybody have the transparent checkerboard in there? That's critical in this. In terms of the drop-down menu here, in this part you can leave it as custom because we've already set those two things up right here. In terms of the wetness of your brush, you want to set that to 20%. That again has to do with how much ink it will actually lay down in this. Set it at 20%. The load, that's how much of your brush actually absorbs the ink that we're going to use. You want to leave that at 100%. The mix, you want to leave that at 40%. And then finally in the flow, and I'm going to check the flow here. The flow is the one thing we change. And I think the number that I put in here, again, I'm going to look at it really quickly, is between 40 and 80%. But it's the mixer brush settings right here. This is what we're actually going through here. And the flow is from 20 to 50. So if things are not happening quick enough in your flow, go ahead and bump it up to somewhere between 20 and 50. And I'm going to make sure that this is how mine is actually set up. I actually told you something wrong. I've got my mix at 40%. Your mix should actually be at 100%. So these are the settings that we actually use right here. Yeah, and everybody else is good. So back in here, change my mix all the way up to 100%. And I'm going to start with my flow at 20% here. We'll see. And basically, I'm going to start in this with a brush. I've got mine is about 175 pixels. So this is how the tool works. You're going to click and drag it across. So I'm going to start up here at the top. Again, this is so why you need a tablet right now. This is so hard to do this with a mouse. But at any rate, I'm simply going to click and drag down and click and drag down, and I'm just dragging color down. And it's not just down. You can actually, there's areas down here you can click and drag up, and you'll notice that it's actually changing the color of this. So that seems a little bit slow to me, so I'm actually going to bump my flow up to around, we'll see what 40% does. And continue this process. Yeah, it feels a little faster. And I'm going to continue it all the way down. I'm going to run down along the sides, and you'll see it actually does a really good job of mixing that color that's actually above and pulling it down into your image. Well, I'm ready to go downstairs and get a tablet right now. And then again, to see the difference in what we've just done, turn off the eye for the before and after, and you can see that we're really bringing that part down. The beauty of this is I can go right over to the other side, and I can actually start doing the same thing. You don't only need to go up and down. You can draw in tone from the side. At this stage of the game, I think I'm going to boost my flow up to 50%. And then again. Well, impossible to do this with a mouse. Well, not impossible, but taking forever. Okay, so again, you can see the before and after and where this is going, and you have not perverted the texture at all. So for most of you right now, you should be just jumping up and down inside with joy, because this is so hard to do any other way. Is this working for you guys? All right, let's close this guy up. I'm going to show you a little bit more extreme example of this. So yeah, let's go back into the images, split the frequency separation images, and there's a file in here called Fabric Retouch. If you can open this guy up, this is going to be a variation on the same theme, but you can see the wrinkles that are actually happening right here on the side of her hip. Again, trying to retouch this. If you zoom in and you take a look at this, this is a this is a plaid fabric that's actually going on in here. It's got an enormous amount of texture. Where do you sample from to actually do this, to change it? And then you've got to get all the fabric to line up again. I mean, this is like this is a nightmare to actually hope to do this. But again, split frequency will actually make this better. So we're going to split this one really quickly. Hit the Command J twice. I'm going to let go of color and tone now and just call the first layer low. I'm going to double click on the top layer and call it high. I'm going to turn off the high layer, select the low layer, and I'm actually going to blur this image now till I actually lose the texture. So what I'm looking to lose is all the detail we've actually got in here. So up to the filter menu, down to blur, down to Gaussian Blur. I'm going to pull back on this. 5 was like way too much on this guy, so I'm going to start back down around a 1 or a 2. I'm at a 1 right now. It's not enough, so I'm going to just use my arrow keys to start to tap up till I feel like I'm really losing all of that texture part. Ooh, my screen redraw is nowhere near as fast as it is normally. So at 2, I've still got stuff in there. At 3 feels pretty good. Take a look around. That part actually feels good to me, although I'm in at 500%, but we'll go for it anyway because I want to show you other things really fast. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK to that. Select my high layer, make it active, turn the eyeball on, come up to the image menu, come down to Apply Image, change the layer from Merge down to Low. Again, everything else should be subtract as your blending mode, scale of 2, offset of 128, say OK, and then come down and change it to linear light. Then I'm going to select my low layer to do the work on my low layer, and I'm going to go to my mixer brush and make it a little bit smaller. And then again, I'm just going to start pulling down on this. This has got to be working faster for you guys than this is working for me. I'm going to crank my flow way up, and we'll see. It's still got to be working faster for you guys. So is Ural's beginning to disappear? Yep. Again, I'm doing this with a mouse, and I have no. I'm trying to try my trackpad and see if that helps at all. No. Eventually, I'll get there. But this keeps all of the pattern that's in the fabric intact. And again, if you keep doing this long enough, eventually you'll get there. I did not put both of my split frequency layers into a group. I'm going to do that right now. And then again, turn it on and off, and you can see the difference in where this is actually going. And it's not to say that even at this stage of the game that I need to get rid of everything. If you double click and you kick back out, sometimes leaving a little bit of wrinkle in there actually helps make it be believable. It's not like the idea in this is not to remove everything. The idea, again, for me, if I was going to do this, I probably would go ahead and remove everything that's in here. So I'm going to zoom into this a little bit more. I'm going to do a little bit more work on this really quickly to see if I can't get it a little bit better. So I'm going to open up my layer. I'm actually going to turn off my high layer and go only to work on my low layer, because again, I can sort of see what's going on here a little bit better. I'm going to go to a regular brush now, not my mixer brush, but just a regular brush, smaller. And go ahead and leave 10% flow, 100% opacity. That's good. It's completely soft brush. That's good. And I'm just going to sample general tone over here, general color over here. So I'm going to hold on the Option key and click on that, and then simply paint around in this a little bit. That brush is way too aggressive. You see how fast that just came out? So I'm going to kill that part and drop my flow down to, again, a 2 or a 3, and then do the same thing. It's much better. And I can sort of like go through these parts, just sort of evening this out, resample another color. Don't stay with a single color. It will never work for you. And then we'll take a look at this. Now, again, it's suppressed it a little bit. But anyway, if we took it all the way to the very end and you had no more wrinkles here at all anymore, then what you can do is collapse your split frequency layer, hold down your Option key and click on adding a black layer mask to your split frequency work. So now I've added a black layer mask to this, so all of the split frequency work has been hidden. And then I can go in with just a regular brush. Again, the B key, I'm going to keep it at white is going to be my foreground color. I can boost the flow now to around a 10%-ish, whatever in there. You can make your brush giant because it doesn't matter. The split frequency work is going to control where you see a change and where you don't. And then you can just start slowly scrubbing this part back in, and I could stop there, or I can say that's not enough and I need to continue it more. And if I had removed all of the wrinkles, if I'd gotten to all the wrinkles to be out, then ultimately this would end up being, it would let me play anywhere in between. Does that make sense, everybody, what I just did? Are we good on this part? All right, I want to show you one last thing, because you know how I feel about destructive stuff. I want to go back to our very first image. So the split frequency retouching image. And I'm going to show you how to do this non-destructively. This will be the last thing we go through today. So far, though, before we get there, are there any questions about what we're really doing here? Is this beginning to make sense to everybody, what's going on here? Your ability to separate tone and color from detail is insanely powerful. Later on in a retouch, I will show you, you can actually steal texture from one image and put it into another. I don't want to throw this at you today because I feel like we've gone through a lot today. So I need this to settle in a little bit. But probably next week we'll actually look at that part. How many people in this room have ever heard of skin brushes for Photoshop? The reason you've never heard of them is because they all suck. The problem with the skin brush is that skin has grain, it has orientation. The skin on your face, specifically your face, but it's all over your body, actually moves in different directions where you are in your face. So typically, for your forehead, your skin actually is horizontal. It goes right to left. That's how the skin grain goes. But the skin that comes off the sides of your nose towards your mouth actually goes down at an angle. So down to 5 o'clock here, down to 7 o'clock here. You can't use a skin brush. So which one do you use for your forehead? It can't be the same one that you use for the side of your nose or the side of your cheeks, because the grain of your skin moves in completely different directions. And that's why skin brushes never work. There's no way, I mean, there are ways you can orient a brush. It's really difficult to, not really difficult to do. There are ways to do it, but then you've got to match the texture. And anyway, it's just really difficult to do. But there is a way using split frequency to actually take somebody else's face and the texture from their face and put it on the image that you're actually working on. So the reason I bring this up is also because a lot of times, like for instance, the side of this girl's lip has got no texture in it. If I wanted to bring texture back into that, where do I pick that from? And I can actually pick it from a completely different image and bring that into this using split frequency without worrying about shifting the tone of the color. But that's for next week. For this week, how do we do this work non-destructively? So the problem that you get into doing this is that when we do the initial split, those are, we're making decisions about how much blur to use. That's the biggest decision. And once you do that split, if let's say you save your image, it's all fine, and you come back to it 6 months later and you want to continue to work on it and you realize you've made a mistake, how do you undo the split? How do you undo the work that you did on the split? There's really no way to do it. You have to redo the split again. So I'll show you what I mean by this. So we're going to split this image again. So again, do the same thing with me. Everybody do this with me, please. Command J twice. I'm going to double click on the low layer to name it. I'm going to double click on the high layer to name it. I did say low. We are going to go ahead and do the split. So go ahead and actually turn off your high layer eyeball, select the low layer. I'm going to zoom in to 100%. And I'm going to do the blur. So up to the filter menu, down to blur, down to Gaussian Blur. And in the beginning, we had already gone through this. We said 4 was going to be our pixel radius on this. That's the one we had picked earlier, and I still think it's correct. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK to this. And then I'm going to come up and I'm going to do my split. So I'm going to pick the high layer, turn on the light, the eyeball next to it, come up to the image menu, down to Apply Image. In the in the layer drop-down menu, pick the low layer. Again, it's still going to be subtract, a scale of 2, offset of 128, say OK to this, and then change this to linear light. So that's my initial split. However, I want to be able to work on safety layers that will allow me to go back in and fix something in case something goes wrong. So to do that, pick your low layer first. Go ahead and select your low layer and just copy it. That's all you need to do, Command J. And leave it named low copy. That's exactly what you want it to be called. We now do all of our work on the low copy. If I get into trouble, I can steal from the original low layer that didn't get touched and bring that back to fix it. We're going to do the same thing with the high layer, but the high layer is a little bit more complicated. So again, select the high layer, Command J to make a copy of it. And you'll see that your image gets really, really crunchy. The reason this has gotten really, really crunchy is because we've doubled up on the linear light part here. At this stage of the game, you want to now change the blending mode of the high copy to normal. I take that back. You want to change that to leave that at linear light. See, even I have to go back and figure these guys out. Oh, I take that back. You do change it. Never mind. I forgot a step. Never mind. Still on the high copy, change it from linear light back to normal. But now you need to clip this high copy to the layer that's right beneath it. So to do that, hover your cursor right between high copy and high, so it's right where those two touch each other. Hold down the Option key and you will get the clipping icon, which is a square with a little arrow pointing down, and click, and it will actually clip it down, and your image will now actually look the same. So in this case now, we do all of our high work on the high copy and all of our low work on the low copy. And if we get into trouble, we can go back to the original high and low to recover what we screwed up. And this is how you do it. We're going to do a quick sample of it. Zoom into the hairs that are on her cheek, or that are on the side of her lip. We're going to do this work on the high copy layer. So I am going to still use the patch tool to do it, but we're going to hit this in one swoop. So just grab the patch tool, and we're just going to grab the entire hair part and drag it over and let go and hit Command D to deselect. Not as good as it should be, whatever, but close enough to here. And then let's say, okay, this is great. Now, if you were to save this image and close it up and then come back and have to reconstruct this, you would have to know what you used as your blur to create the low layer so that you could recreate a new high layer to recover. But we don't have to do that because we've actually got this low copy layer, the high copy layer has the original content in it. If you turn off the eyeball here, you see the hair is all still there. So I can recover it. It's tricky how you do the recovery, so I'm going to show you that, and it'll be the last thing that we actually do. So I'm going to turn that back on high copy. The thing about it is that we're going to clone back in the information from the untouched virgin high layer into the high copy. To do that, we need a reference point. So to create a reference point, we're going to bring down two guides, and I'm going to bring it down right in this middle area right here. So I'm going to click and grab a guide and just drag it down from the top. And I'm going to click on my ruler on the left and drag another one over here. What I'm trying to do is get a place where I can do, where I know exactly where to click a source and then exactly where I need to click a destination in two different layers. So to do this, I'm going to turn off my high copy version. I'm going to select my high copy, the part of it that is still got the hair in it. I am going to hit the S key to get the clone stamp tool. So I do have the clone stamp tool. I'm going to make it a little bit larger. And then I'm going to zoom way in. I'm going to come in because I really need to see these crosshairs. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hover my clone stamp tool right over the intersection of those two guides. I'm going to hold down the Option key and click. That sets my source point at that spot. Then I'm going to turn on my high copy, the copy that I need to replace with that information. And then I'm going to come back up. I'm going to actually change the sample here from current and below to current only. Again, normal blending mode, 100% opacity, 100% flow. But now I'm going to come over, and again, this allows me to hover over those crosshairs to set my destination. And I'm going to click, and then I can simply paint. And it brings back in all the hair where it would actually be, and everything else is in register. And so that is how I've recovered, because I've still got an untouched virgin high copy and an untouched low version as well. Does this make sense to everyone, what just happened? Are we good? Okie dokie. So for next week, oh, this is good. You can close all this up. None of this is our homework. So for next week, I need to make sure everybody understands this, so please do this with me really quickly, and we're out of here in 30 seconds. So in your assignment folder, there are two copies of this file. One says 081025. It's the one that you've actually already been knocking out. And then there's also a one right underneath it that has notes. One's a TIFF, one's a JPEG. I need you to open them both into Photoshop for me. So I just click on them both and drag them into Photoshop. So One of them is the image that you actually need to do the work on, and the other is a set of retouching notes. And if anybody in this room ever decides to get into professional retouching, you need to do this with your clients. You need to spell out exactly what needs to be done so that after 30 hours of retouching that you're billing for 30 hours, they come back and they said, well, you didn't do this and you didn't do that and you didn't do this. You can go right back to this image and say, it isn't on there anywhere. Make sense? But, so what are you going to actually do? This has got all the notes. You need to fill in the hair at the top. You need to balance the skin tones that are over here. You can see the blotchiness part. You need to clean up the eyebrows. There's stray hairs that are flying up. You need to fix all the blemishes. And now this note just points to one blemish, but she's got them all over her face. So this doesn't mean you fix one, you fix them all. You need to remove the red lines, the veins that are in her eyes. You need to remove the contact lenses. You see the shadow of contact lenses? You need to remove that part. You need to even out the skin tone here. You need to clean up the stuff in her nostrils. Remove the hair from the side of her face. You need to remove the stray eyelashes here, the ones that are boinging sideways that don't make any sense. You need to smooth out this skin. You need to remove the hair. We've already talked about that. You need to remove the frown lines that are right there. You need to fix her lip. That does not mean you remove all the shine in her lip. That means you clean up any of the small pieces of dead skin that are on her lip. You need to remove the pores that are down at the bottom. You need to add the missing tooth that's here. You need to fix the front tooth that's right here. And then there's hair that's on the other side that you need to remove as well. If you look down here at the bottom, you need to balance the neck color with her face color. And then the assignment will read, at the very beginning, you need to knock this image out and put it on a white background. Does this make sense? So read the assignment, because that'll tell you to knock the image out, put it on a white background, remove the spill. But then these are your retouching notes. Are there questions about this? Okay, I will see you guys next week.